me some words that fit the category of joy, that would fall into joy. And my wife wrote frantically as you all gave her words to say. And then we did the same thing with not joy, and she's writing crazily as you're giving all these word associations. And I had a few people come up to me afterwards and say, wow, Jeff, your wife, she can do that really fast and keep the lines, and there's no lines on here, and I'm so impressed, that kind of thing. And I'm thinking, oh, that's no big deal. I could do that. So I did. I decided I'm going to write as fast as she did. Let's see what it looks like. I took all the words that you gave me and I wrote this. That's not joy right there. That's not joy. There you go, Annie. Oh man, I just hurt the golf arm, didn't I? Golf swings off. All right, so it's so easy, isn't it, to go from not joy to joy. We talked about that last week, and I think the reason why it's so easy to go from joy to not joy, I mean, we can be over here and things are going great, and boom, we're over here, right? We've all experienced that. I think it's because we treat life as circumstantial, that everything that happens determines where my joy level is, and that's kind of crazy, right? Somebody cuts you off, steals your joy. Somebody ticks you off, steals your joy. You just have an off day and there goes your joy. But circumstances shouldn't be the reason, right? No way can circumstances steal our joy. In fact, you know people, I know you do because I know them, that they've had some pretty tough things happen in their life and yet they still persist in joy. It doesn't affect the joy in them. It's still there. Now, I mean, there's sadness and there's pain, but there's still deep inside joy. It can't be about circumstances. In fact, James tells us it's not about circumstances. He says, consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds. Trials of many kinds is not a good circumstance. Would you agree? No way is that a good circumstance. And yet he says, I want you to consider it pure joy. I want you to choose joy, even in those situations, knowing that God can take this and make something good out of it. So the question that we've had it for 2 weeks now, how do I choose joy? How do I choose joy? Last week we began to answer it by talking about the first of 3 stories Jesus gave. They're parables. They're found in Luke 15. And the first parable had to do with sheep. All 3 of these parables have to do with joy. How do sheep have to do with joy? Well, in each of these, he's identifying us. He's saying, this is what you are like, and yet God still goes after you, and God has tremendous joy when you return. So here's the sheep. Let's just talk about sheep real quick as a review. I want to show you a picture of sheep so that you can get in your mind what sheep are really like, because I know what you think sheep are like. You think sheep are cuddly and cute, and they are. They are cuddly and cute, but they are also dumb. Sheep are dumb. They need a shepherd to lead them. It's the only creature that God has created, and I think for this purpose, so we understand that we need a shepherd to lead us. Sheep will wander off, individually wander off and get themselves killed because they're defenseless on their own. Everybody can attack a sheep pretty much. So sheep are dumb, and we're like that because we wander off too, and we find ourselves sometimes wandering off, and we know we're doing it. We absolutely know we're doing it. There are other times, and this is probably more the case, we don't even know we're doing it, and we find ourselves so far away from God and so far away from joy because we're away from God. Because here's the deal. God seeks after us. God finds us. God helps us to come back to Him, and when He brings us back, He throws this huge party, it says. Whenever a sinner repents, he throws this huge party, he says. And why a party? Because a party is joyous. Because God is joyous. Because God is overjoyed. Because in God is joy. His essence, He is joy. He is love. He is all those things. He's holy, but He's also joy. He's the source of joy. And so when we talk about God being joy, we should think about that image, not of the sheep. Try to get that tongue-sticking sheep out of your mind. And think about Jesus actually carrying the sheep on His shoulders back to the flock. That should be the image that we have because He goes after us and desires for us to be returned, and He is overjoyed. And so when we ask the question, how to choose joy, we began with the answer. This is just the first step. It's only the first story. We're going to look at the second one today. Stay close to the shepherd. Stay near Him. If He is joy, you realize that every time that you feel yourself moving in this direction and finding yourself over here, there's a good possibility that's because you have moved away from the Good Shepherd. You've moved away from God. You've moved away from the source of joy. You find yourself dwelling in the land of not joy, there's a good chance you're not as close to God as you were. Not that he moved, but that you wandered away. So choose joy. Choose joy. So now we're ready to talk about the second story. And the second story, I have to be honest with you, is a story that doesn't get a whole lot of play because it just doesn't seem to be as cool as the other two stories. Now, see if this is true for you. You know the lost sheep story. If you've been in church, from little person, or if you just came to church, at some point you've heard there were 100 sheep, one wandered away, the shepherd left the 99 in the open country, went after the one. You know that story. And sheep are cute. Dumb, but cute. We also know the third story that we're going to look at next week. That third story is also about a lost thing, a lost son. It's the prodigal son story. And man, of the three stories, that's the most famous. If you've heard of only one of these stories, that's the one you've heard of. And yet, it's this second story, the lost coin, that we're at today. And so it's almost like we don't even care about that story. It doesn't seem that big a deal. A woman loses a coin, big deal, But actually, hidden in this story is something that God wants us to believe. And it will help us to not lose our joy, but to actually choose joy. He wants us to believe something. And it's not just that he wants us to believe that he is joy, that he's the source of joy, and that he is overjoyed when we return home, and that he wants us to come home, and he wants us to be in his joy. All of that is so true. What he wants us to know, though, is hidden inside this story. So we have to actually read it to see what that truth is. What is it that we're to believe about God and about ourselves that we find in the coin story that is often not really talked about? So let's just go in. Let's just dig in. And you're going to find a lot of parallels between this second story and the first story. He just talked about the shepherd losing the sheep and finding the sheep and overjoyed because the sheep returns. He says, or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins. A silver coin is a drachma. It's worth about a day's wage. She had 10 of them, meaning she has about 2 weeks of salaries. So she's in her possession. She loses one of them. That's a pretty good loss right there. So she loses one of her coins. Now, the coins themselves, being that there's 10 of them, is significant. And it's significant probably for a couple of reasons, but one right here, right now, that we need to talk about is this. There's a escalation, if you will, of stories going on. We're going from a sheep story and we're moving it up. We're upping the stakes. It's escalating to a coin story. Now, I know, it doesn't seem like it. It's just coins. Come on, she loses a coin. Sheep were so valuable to a shepherd. And even if he loses one of his 100, he's going to go search for that sheep because it's more than just a means of him making a living. This is someone he's named. This is somebody that is close to him, is like family to that shepherd. And we're just talking about a loss of a coin here, and yet somehow we're supposed to see that this is worse. Somehow this is worse, that she has lost one of her 10 coins. In fact, let's just lay it out. So you got the sheep story, which is a 100-to-1 ratio, which is, compared to the others, not as big a loss, actually, as the next one, which is just 10-to-1. I mean, you got 10 coins and one gets lost. So it's escalating. Then when you get to the lost son, the prodigal son, you've got 2 brothers and one is lost. Lost spiritually, just takes off, right? So you've got this escalation so something in this story must be important for us to know. And it's probably not going to be seen on the surface because we just dismiss it so quickly. So we go on. He says, does she not light a lamp and sweep the house and search carefully until she finds it? Same kind of question that was asked of the shepherd. Come on, doesn't the shepherd leave the 99 in the open country, go after the one until he finds that one? See the parallel? Of course, the answer is yes. And when she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbors together and says, rejoice with me, I found my lost coin. So she throws a little party. Same thing. The shepherd did the same thing. He lost his sheep. When he finds the sheep, he carries it on his shoulder. He comes back. He says, join in with me in the celebration. I found my lost sheep. I thought it was dead. It's not dead. It's alive. So there's the same kind of celebration here. In the same way, he says this in both stories, in the same way I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. That same escalation happens in this phrase, angels of God, because in the first story, it was just in heaven. They just celebrated in heaven. And now we're talking about angels celebrating in heaven. In the third story, we'll have the Father celebrating with all of heaven. And I know all of it implies heaven, 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 right? And yet there's still that escalation, which says something about this story is really, really important, and we can't miss it. The question is, what? What are we supposed to see? You could interpret this story as an old, poor widow who only has 10 coins, 2 weeks of wages. She's living paycheck to paycheck, and she loses one of them, and it devastates her, and she sweeps the whole house until she finds it. She cannot lose that coin. It's too valuable to her to lose. You could look at it that way. I have a couple of reasons why I don't think that's how we're supposed to see the story. One is, intuitively, I just feel like the loss of the sheep is higher, even though it's 100 to 1, and now we're 10 to 1. But also, think about the time that elapsed. There's a great deal of time that has moved on here. In each of the shepherd is searching high and low for his lost sheep. This is not someone that he finds quickly. Otherwise, if the sheep was right behind him, he's like, oh, there you are, you little stinker. He's not going to throw a party for that little thing, is he? He's going to throw a party, though, if he searched and thought the sheep was dead. And then you go to the woman who's cleaning the house. She lights a lamp. It implies that maybe she's up all night searching for this coin in every dark crevice, doing more than spring cleaning, and cannot find it, and finally finds it and just celebrates and is overjoyed. A lot of time goes by. We know a lot of time goes by with the prodigal son, right? I mean, he goes off to a foreign land and he wastes all of his father's wealth, and then when he has nothing, he's destitute and he's working, and it's after he works a while that he realizes. So many nights have passed. The father doesn't even know where he's at, so the father can't search for him, but the father waits for him out in the field, waiting. He returns and he runs to him. So there's all this implied time that has gone by, and to me, just my opinion, it just doesn't feel like a day's wage would be enough to warrant this story. I think Jesus would have chosen a larger coin to be lost, or maybe all 10 coins to be lost. And there's another thing. There is all this celebration for something that's lost. In each one, amazing celebration. And we're told that heaven mimics that celebration. Heaven has a celebration for a lost sinner, just like the woman does for the coin, and the shepherd for the sheep, and the father for the son. And there ought to be some kind of equality there. This is worthy of celebration. Now help me out. Raise your hand. This is time to be honest right here. How many of you have ever lost your keys? Raise your hand if you've ever lost your keys. Okay. Keep your hands up if you've ever lost your keys twice in one day. Some of you have. Well, we're not going to do a contest to see who has lost their keys more than twice in one day. How about your glasses? You ever lose your glasses? Yeah, raise your hand. Now keep your hands up. Ever find your glasses on top of your head? There's several of you, right? All right, so how many, same thing with the retainer. Not on top of your head, but you've lost your retainer. Some of you. Where's my daughter? I need to know. She lost her retainer. I think she's serving. So I've actually 4 times in a week. We've had to go back to the orthodontist before. Yes, that's because she's chewed through her retainer more than lost it. Yeah, she chewed through it after she dug through the trash to grab it. After she threw it away, stuck it. No, she never did that. I think the worst thing for me, when speaking of lost things, is when my grandma lost her teeth. I was little, and she's like, help me find my teeth. Help me find my teeth. I'm like, no, I don't want to find your teeth. And like, come on, keep looking. I'm like, this is a horror show. The teeth are gonna, I'm gonna open up something. The teeth are gonna be sitting there, something. I imagine opening the fridge and they're chattering. Okay, so what do you feel when you lose something? You feel anger? You feel disappointment? You feel frustration? Yeah, right? Those are the feelings you have. What do you feel when you find it? Joy, right? You go from not joy to joy, right? But do you ever throw a party for the missing glasses? Hey, come on over! Please, we got glasses. They were missing. They're now found. I'm so excited. I know. Coins are more expensive than glasses, but still, you get my point. I think there's something more going on here. But what? I think that we're actually not talking about an old poor widow. I really do. And the reason I say that is because if we were Jewish and we were in the first century, when Jesus says a woman had 10 coins, silver coins, and she lost one, something would have come to mind. that doesn't come to mind to us. That's something that would have come to mind was what was given to a young girl on her wedding day. So I think this is actually a young married woman. And what was given on her wedding day were coins from her husband, and those coins were silver coins. Now, they're intrinsically, the value of 2 weeks' worth of wages is not an immense amount of money. If it's 10 coins, it didn't have to be 10 coins. Could be more. But the idea is, the ring you wear on your finger has a certain intrinsic value as well. But it has an immensely greater value when you make your vows and you promise to be faithful and committed to one another, that now becomes invaluable, right? And that's the same idea with the coin headdress that she or her bridesmaids would make with the coins. Sometimes those coins were even stamped with the family seal on them. They were like the wedding ring. I'm going to show you a reenactment picture. This is a reenactment of a Jewish wedding with the bridesmaids putting her headdress of coins on her. And as you can tell, she's overjoyed. So here's the idea that when the woman loses her coin, it represents infidelity. Not that she has committed anything, it simply has dropped off of her headdress. Because you got to remember this. The woman is innocent. The woman is faithful. She loves her husband. Because in the story of the sheep, the shepherd represents God. In the story of the woman represents God. In the story of the prodigal son, the father represents God. The sheep wander away, the coin falls off, the son rebels and leaves. We're the sheep, we're the coin that's fallen off, we're the son that leaves. And so when we understand it that way, we begin to see, oh, I get it. The purity and the holiness of God is marred by what we do. When we choose to rebel against God, we've fallen off into the dark, dirty places and are lost. We mix in with the world and we get contaminated and marred and dirtied because of our choices. And it reflects on God and His church. Have you ever had someone say to you, I didn't know Christians did that? And maybe you've never heard it said, but in your head you heard it said because you felt that's what they were saying when they discovered what you had done. What this represents for us is our not just wandering away. The sheep story is about us wandering away from God. And when we wander away from Him, we walk out of the presence of joy. And we wander into places we ought not be. And there's no protection out there. And we're vulnerable to be picked off. And we call that to a sheep to die. We call it to us spiritual death. Because what happens out there is there's all these temptations. And we're prone to not just wander, as the song says, but to taste the apple again. And it's those actions and those activities that is being represented by simply the coin falling off into the dirt and getting lost. But the beautiful thing is that God doesn't just go after the sheep to find the one that has wandered, but goes after the coin to find that coin. You are the coin. You feel like you're broken and marred, and He picks you up and He dusts you off and He cleans you, and by the cross of Christ and His blood purifies you. And not just that, because we're thinking, no way that God would celebrate us. He would celebrate a wandering sheep. They're dumb. They don't know what they're doing. We're dumb at times. We don't know what we're doing. But it's when we willfully and we choose and we're sinning against God that He cleans us up and He takes us, and He doesn't just put us aside. He certainly doesn't throw us away. He restores us to the crown of His glory for everyone to see. He carries the sheep and He wears us again because He is a merciful and good God. And He loves you beyond what you could ever imagine being loved. He finds value in you, even though you don't feel value in yourself. Here's the problem, especially after you've given your life, you've surrendered life, and you've died to self, you live for Him, and you just know now that you're a crown in His, and it falls off because of a choice you make, and you feel like, oh, I'm so worthless, and I could never come back, and He cleans you off because you've repented and puts you back. And He proudly wears you. He's not embarrassed by you. He's not disgusted by you. He loves you. What happens, though, is a lot of times we stay over here in not joy because we have a long memory of what we've done. And He tells us, I forgot it already, but we don't. And the world certainly doesn't forget, and they talk about it, and they'll remember, and they'll remind you. Sometimes they'll just remind you by that look. And the enemy certainly wants to tell you, you're not worthy of God. He doesn't love you. Just think about what you've done. There's no way He would accept you back, and we stay here in not joy. And it's by our own choice we stay here because God's already chosen to restore us to the crown of His glory. And here's the deal. This is what we need to know. This is what we need to believe about ourselves. Not only do you stay in joy when you stay close to the source of joy, and the shepherd wants so badly for you to be right here next to Him. But while you're here, you need to listen to Him. You need to listen to His voice, because what He speaks over you and what He says about you are really the only things you need to hear. You don't need to hear what the world is saying. You don't need to hear what Satan is saying. You certainly don't need to hear what that voice inside is saying. Because it's saying things like you're worthless, you don't count, never be, that they will not, no one will trust, I don't trust you. And you have to dismiss that and say, well, wait a second, He calls me redeemed. He says, I belong. He says, I'm His child. He says, I am restored. I don't have to live in the dirt anymore, and I don't have to hang on His crown of glory thinking that I'm not beautiful, because I am. Because He calls me clean. That is the voice you need to hear. Stop listening to the voice of the world. Choose joy. And maybe this morning you don't feel worthy. I get that. There are days I don't feel worthy. And maybe you feel defeated. I feel defeat. You feel weak. I feel weak. I know those feelings because we all have them. But here's the deal. Truth is supposed to set us free. And so as long as you're listening to the lies, and as long as you continue to bring back your past and you don't allow God to speak truth into your life, you're never going to be free. And here's the truth you need to hear if you've never accepted this. You were broken, as Tom said in his message. You were a sinner. You are unworthy. And yet He found worth in you. He took you and placed you in His crown and said, you are my jewel. You belong. The way that is even possible is because Jesus died on the cross for your sins. He took every punishment you deserve for every sin. That's every sin before you gave your life to Christ, every sin after, because we still struggle. He paid it with His blood. And so now I invite you to accept that, to hear His voice. He accepts you. He loves you. Believe that. You need to believe what God tells you. Believe that. If you've never given your life to Jesus, I want to give you an invitation right now. I want to invite you to come, confess your faith. I'll talk about how you demonstrate dying to self and being born again. I ask you to come. If you've never come, if you've never given your life, if you need to recommit your life because you've walked away from God, I'm going to invite you to come and recommit yourself. If you just need prayer, your church family would love to circle up around you and pray for you. This is your invitation. You come for what you need. Let's stand. I'm going to pray, then we're going to sing. Father God, this morning we come as wandering sheep and lost coins. We've walked away from you, and we've got dirtied by this world. And some of it by our own measures and our own standards is pretty vile. We've hurt you. And we're so sorry. Father, I pray for courage for those who have never confessed Christ as their Lord to step out in faith this morning and come forward and do so. You tell us if we confess before men, you will confess us before the Father. Father, I pray for those that need to rededicate and those who need prayer. I pray for this to be a healing day. As we realize the value you actually see in us and we begin to listen to what you say about us and not what the world says. We ask for this in Jesus' name. Amen. If you have a decision, come.